He pretended to be poor to test her love, but she was hiding something even deeper. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The late afternoon sun filtered through the antique windows of Cornerstone Books, casting long shadows across weathered wooden floors that had witnessed countless stories unfold. Nia Brooks stood behind the counter, her fingers absently tracing the spine of a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice as she watched raindrops begin to pepper the cobblestone street outside. At 30, she had mastered the art of blending into the background of her own life, finding solace in the company of literary characters who couldn't disappoint her the way real people invariably did. The brass bell above the door chimed softly, drawing her attention to a man who seemed to drift in with the autumn breeze. His clothes were simple to the point of being forgettable, a grey hoodie that had seen better days, worn jeans, and boots that needed resoling. But there was something about his eyes that made Nia pause. They were the colour of storm clouds, carrying the weight of unspoken stories, searching the shelves as if looking for answers rather than books. "Can I help you find something?" The words left her mouth before she could stop them, breaking her usual rule of letting customers browse in peace. He turned, and for a moment their eyes met. A strange current of recognition passed between them, though Nia was certain they'd never met. "I'm looking for something about second chances," he said, his voice carrying a gentle thoughtfulness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. "Though I suppose that could be any book in here, couldn't it?" Nia felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Well, that depends on whether you're looking for someone else's second chance or trying to write your own. Maybe both." He moved closer to the counter, and Nia caught the faint scent of coffee and rain. "I'm Theo Callahan." What Nia couldn't know was that this simple introduction contained its own universe of omissions. That Theo had spent the last hour walking Savannah's historic streets, deliberately avoiding the five-star hotels his family owned, trying to forget the weight of responsibility that came with being heir to the Callahan International Hotel Group. He'd chosen Savannah precisely because it was far from the glittering cities where his name meant something, where every interaction was colored by expectations and assumptions. "Or Nia Brooks," she replied, unconsciously touching the silver locket that hung around her neck, a gesture that didn't escape Theo's notice. The locket held secrets of its own, memories that sometimes felt too heavy to carry. The second chances section would be upstairs, though we don't actually label it that way. It's mixed in with literary fiction and personal growth. "Would you mind showing me?" Theo asked, and something in his tone suggested he was asking for more than directions through the shelves. Nia hesitated. Her usual response would have been to point the way and remain behind her protective counter, but there was something disarming about this stranger, something that made her want to step out of the careful boundaries she'd drawn around her life. "Follow me," she said, emerging from behind the counter. As they climbed the creaking wooden stairs, Nia found herself sharing little pieces of the store's history, the section of Civil War literature that had survived a flood in '98, the corner where local authors gathered for monthly readings, the window seat where she'd spent countless lunch breaks lost in other people's stories. What she didn't mention was how this bookstore had become her sanctuary after everything that happened with her family 3 years ago, how each carefully curated shelf represented another brick in the wall she'd built between herself and the world, how she sometimes stayed late into the night, arranging and rearranging books, trying to create the order in her surroundings that she couldn't find in her life. Theo listened with an intensity that made her both comfortable and nervous. He asked questions that showed he was truly listening, picking up threads of conversation she thought she'd dropped. When they reached the section she'd mentioned, he didn't immediately turn to the books. Instead, he leaned against a shelf, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "Do you believe in them?" he asked quietly. "Second chances." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken weight. Nia's hand went to her locket again, a movement as unconscious as breathing. I believe they exist, she said carefully. I'm just not sure everyone deserves them. Something flickered across Theo's face, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow traveler on the road of carefully guarded hearts. He reached for a book without looking at the shelf, his eyes still on her. Then I'll take whatever this is. Sometimes the best recommendations are the ones we don't plan. Nia glanced at the book in his hand. The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. A story about secrets, identity, and the long road to self-acceptance. The irony wasn't lost on her. As she rang up his purchase, their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange of the book. A simple touch, but one that sent an unexpected current through them both. Theo lingered at the counter, seemingly searching for a reason to stay. The coffee shop next door, he said finally. Is it any good? Depends on what you're looking for, Nia replied, surprising herself with a small smile. Their espresso is decent, but their chai tea is what keeps me going through the long afternoons. Would you... Theo paused, weighing his words. Would you want to get a cup? When you're done here. The invitation hung between them like a delicate thread, one that could either weave them together or snap under the weight of their respective secrets. Nia looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the contradiction between his worn clothes and his graceful bearing, between his simple appearance and the complexity she sensed beneath. I close at 6, she heard herself say, even as her internal warnings flared to life. She'd sworn off relationships after the last disaster, had promised herself she wouldn't risk her heart again. Yet here she was, saying yes to a stranger who felt inexplicably familiar. What neither of them knew in that moment was how this simple exchange, a book about second chances, an invitation for tea, would set in motion events that would force them both to confront their carefully constructed facades. That sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't in keeping secrets, but in letting them go. As Theo left the store, bell chiming softly behind him, Nia returned to her place behind the counter. She opened her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice again, but the familiar words blurred before her eyes. Instead, she found herself thinking about storm cloud eyes and the way some people walk into your life carrying the weight of unspoken stories that somehow mirror your own. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Savannah's historic streets, washing away the dust of the past, making room for whatever tomorrow might bring. The Willow Leaf Tea House next door to Cornerstone Books had been serving Savannah's readers for nearly 3 decades. Its walls, painted a soft sage green, held the whispered conversations of countless first dates, tearful goodbyes, and everything in between. As Nia locked up the bookstore at 6, she wondered which category this evening would fall into. Theo was already there, seated at a corner table beneath a vintage map of old Savannah. He'd changed his hoodie for a simple navy sweater that looked equally worn, but somehow more deliberate, as if he was playing a part he hadn't quite mastered. When he saw her, he stood, an oddly formal gesture that seemed to surprise even him. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Another incongruous action for someone who appeared to be living on the edges of society. I wasn't sure either, Nia admitted, settling into the offered seat. She noticed he'd already ordered. 2 steaming cups sat on the table. But you seem to have been confident enough to order for both of us. Chai tea, he said, sliding 1 cup toward her. You mentioned it was what keeps you going through long afternoons. I took a chance. The simple fact that he'd remembered such a small detail from their earlier conversation made something shift in Nia's chest. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, inhaling the familiar blend of spices. Most people just order coffee. I'm not most people. The words carried a weight that Theo seemed to immediately regret. He quickly added, I try not to make assumptions about what others might want. Nia studied him over the rim of her cup. In the soft lighting of the tea house, she could see details she'd missed in the bookstore. A faint scar above his right eyebrow. The expensive watch he wore despite his otherwise humble appearance. The way his fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm on the table's surface when he was thinking. Up to the book you bought, she said. choosing her words carefully. It's about a man who spends his whole life pretending to be someone he's not. What made you choose it? You mean besides the fact that you handed it to me? Theo's smile held a trace of irony. Maybe sometimes we're drawn to stories that reflect truths we're not ready to face. Outside, Savannah's evening was settling in, the street lamps casting warm pools of light on the cobblestones. A horse-drawn carriage clattered past, carrying tourists enchanted by the city's romantic facade. Inside, Nia felt herself being drawn into a moment that felt both real and carefully orchestrated. "What brings you to Savannah?" she asked, trying to ground herself in practical details. "Would you believe me if I said I was looking for something authentic?" Theo leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Cities like this, they have a way of holding on to their truth, don't they? Even with all the tourist traps and ghost tours, there's something real underneath. And what truth are you looking for? Maybe the same one you're hiding from." The words landed between them like a challenge. Nia's hand instinctively went to her locket, and this time Theo's eyes followed the movement deliberately. "That's important to you," he observed. "And with the locket, it's a reminder," Nia said, dropping her hand quickly, "of promises made and kept and keeping." They fell into a silence that felt both comfortable and dangerous. Through the tea-house window, Nia could see her bookstore across the street, its windows now dark. For 3 years, it had been her anchor, her excuse, her shelter from the storms of her past. Yet sitting here with this stranger who seemed to see too much, she felt those carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Tell me about your favorite book," Theo said suddenly, as if sensing her need to retreat to safer ground. "Not the one you tell customers about, but the one that lives inside you." The question was like a key turning in a lock Nia hadn't known existed. She found herself talking about The Great Gatsby, not the surface story of wealth and obsession, but the deeper currents of reinvention and the cost of dreams. As she spoke, she watched Theo's expression shift, noting how he seemed to flinch slightly at mentions of old money and societal expectations. "My, it's interesting," he said when she finished, "how we often love stories that warn us about the very things we're doing ourselves." "And what are you doing?" Theo Callahan. He met her gaze steadily. "Right now, having tea with a beautiful bookstore owner who sees too much and says too little." The compliment should have felt like a deflection, but instead it landed as something closer to a confession. Nia felt her cheeks warm, not just from the words, but from the raw honesty in his tone. "It's getting late," she said, noticing how the tea-house had emptied around them. "I should go. Let me walk you to your car." "I live upstairs," she admitted, "above the bookstore. It's convenient." "Of course you do," Theo smiled. "A guardian of stories, living among them. It suits you." They walked to the bookstore's entrance together, their steps unconsciously slowing as they approached. Under the glow of the street lamp, Nia could see that Theo's shoes, despite their worn appearance, were handmade Italian leather, another detail that didn't quite fit his carefully constructed image. "Thank you for the tea," she said, fishing for her keys. And the conversation. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow?" Theo asked, the words coming out in a rush that suggested he hadn't planned to say them. "There's a small place on River Street, nothing fancy, but the food is real, like everything else I'm looking for here." Nia hesitated, her keys cold in her hand. She thought of the locket against her chest, heavy with its secrets, of the careful life she'd built here, safe within her boundaries, of the way Theo looked at her as if he could see past all her defenses and wanted to know what lay beyond them. "Yes," she heard herself say, "but I choose the place." His smile was immediate and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Deal." As she climbed the stairs to her apartment later, Nia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger with questionable taste in sweaters." She found herself smiling as she typed back. "The sweater was deliberate, wasn't it?" His response came quickly. "Maybe. Like everything else about me." Nia stood at her window, looking down at the street where Theo's figure was still visible, illuminated by the warm glow of Savannah's historic lamps. He paused at the corner, looking back up at her window, and for a moment she could see the weight of his own secrets in the set of his shoulders. As she got ready for bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror, the silver locket gleaming against her skin. "Oh, what are you doing?" she whispered to herself, but she already knew the answer. She was stepping off the safe path she'd carved for herself, into territory where both truth and deception waited to reshape her world. Outside, a late-night train whistle echoed through the city, its mournful sound carrying promises of journeys and changes to come. Tomorrow would bring dinner, more conversations, more chances to either reveal or conceal. For now, Nia let herself feel the unfamiliar flutter of anticipation, even as her practical mind reminded her that some mysteries, once unraveled, could never be rewound. Pearl's kitchen sat tucked away on one of Savannah's less tourist-trodden streets, its weathered blue exterior barely visible behind a canopy of Spanish moss. Nia arrived early, watching through the window as the sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. She'd chosen this place carefully, not just for its intimate atmosphere and incredible southern cuisine, but because it was far from the upscale restaurants where someone like Theo Callahan, heir to a hotel empire, might typically dine. What she didn't know was that Theo had spent the afternoon pacing his modest rental apartment, fighting the urge to change into the tailored clothes that filled the hidden compartment of his suitcase. Every time he reached for them, he reminded himself why he was here: to find someone who could see past the Callahan name and fortune, to discover if genuine connection was still possible in a world where everything seemed to have a price tag. When he arrived, Nia's breath caught slightly. Even in simple clothes, dark jeans and a charcoal button-down that had been carefully selected to look inexpensive, there was something magnetic about his presence. He carried himself with an unconscious grace that no amount of affected poverty could quite disguise. "I was worried I wouldn't find it," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "This place is like a well-kept secret." "That's why I chose it," Nia replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Sometimes the best things in life are hidden away from the spotlight." A shadow crossed Theo's face, quick but noticeable. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Before she could respond, Ruby Pearl herself emerged from the kitchen, a force of nature in her 70s, with silver hair and knowing eyes that had seen generations of Savannah's stories unfold in her restaurant. "Nia Brooks," Ruby called out warmly. "I haven't seen you in here for months, child. Not since that night when—" She stopped abruptly at Nia's slight headshake, reading the room with the wisdom of years. "Well, never mind that. Who's this handsome stranger you've brought to my table?" "Theo Callahan," he introduced himself, standing to shake her hand. The gesture was impeccably polite, almost courtly, another crack in his carefully constructed facade. Ruby's eyes narrowed slightly, and Nia held her breath. But if the older woman recognized the name that graced hotels across the country, she gave no sign. "Well, Mr. Callahan, you're in for a treat." Nobody leaves Pearls hungry or disappointed. After Ruby had taken their orders, including her famous blackberry cobbler that wasn't technically on the menu, Theo turned back to Nia. "You come here often?" "I used to," she said, playing with the stem of her water glass. "It was my father's favorite place." "Was?" The past tense hung between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Nia's hand went to her locket, and this time she forced herself to let it drop deliberately. "He's not dead," she clarified quickly. "He's just not here anymore." Theo leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. "There's a story there." "There's a story everywhere in Savannah," she deflected. "That's what makes this city special. Every brick, every tree, every shadow holds a tale waiting to be told. Or waiting to be hidden," Theo added softly. Their appetizers arrived, crispy fried green tomatoes drizzled with remoulade sauce that made Theo's eyes widen in genuine surprise. "This is incredible," he said, and for a moment his practiced restraint slipped. "The balance of flavors, the texture, it reminds me of this little place in New Orleans where—" He caught himself, but not before Nia noticed. "You travel a lot?" she asked innocently. When I can, he said carefully. Odd jobs here and there. You pick up experiences along the way. Nia took a bite of her tomato, savoring both the taste and the moment. What kind of odd jobs? Construction, mainly, he said, the lies smooth from practice. I like working with my hands, helping build something lasting. It wasn't entirely false. He did help build things, just on a much grander scale than he was implying. Every Callahan hotel was personally overseen by family members, a tradition his father had instilled in him from childhood. Their entrees arrived, shrimp and grits for her, bourbon-glazed pork chop for him. The food was exceptional, but both were more focused on the dance of conversation, of revealing and concealing, of trying to understand the mystery that sat across the table. Tell me about your bookstore, Theo said, as they shared the cobbler later. How did you end up there? Nia stirred her coffee, buying time. It was supposed to be temporary, she admitted. Just something to help make ends meet while I figured out my next step. But then life happened. Plans changed. Now it's home. And before, what was the plan? Law school, she said, and this time the truth slipped out before she could catch it. Georgetown had accepted me. I was all set to go, and then she stopped, realizing she'd said too much. And then? Theo prompted gently. Nia looked down at her coffee, watching the cream create patterns that looked like the swirling paths of their separate deceptions. And then I learned that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as the thing you want to do. The words hit Theo like a physical force. Wasn't that exactly what he was struggling with? The weight of family expectations, the pressure of maintaining the Callahan legacy, the desperate need to find something real in a world of corporate shadows. I understand, he said, and for the first time that evening, neither of them was pretending. After dinner, they walked through one of Savannah's historic squares, their steps slow and meandering. The night air was thick with jasmine and possibility, and overhead the stars peeked through the canopy of oak trees. There's something about you, Nia Brooks, Theo said, stopping by a fountain that burbled softly in the darkness. Something that makes me want to tell you everything. But you won't, she said, and it wasn't a question. Not yet. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. Not until I'm sure. Sure of what? That what's growing between us is real. His hand dropped, but the warmth of his touch lingered. That is not just another story we're telling ourselves. As they said goodnight outside her bookstore, Nia felt the weight of her locket like an anchor. Inside it lay the truth that could destroy this fragile connection. The reason she'd given up law school, the promise that kept her bound to Savannah, the secret that woke her in cold sweats some nights. Breakfast tomorrow? Theo asked. I know a place. No, Nia interrupted. Let me cook for you. Upstairs. 9 o'clock. The invitation surprised them both. Having him in her space, among her personal things, would make maintaining distance that much harder. But something was shifting between them, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of their carefully constructed lives. 9 o'clock, he agreed, and then hesitated before adding, Nia, whatever you're protecting, whatever you're afraid to share, it doesn't change what I see when I look at you. She watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the Savannah night. Only then did she allow herself to whisper, but it might change everything. Above her, the waxing moon cast shadows through the Spanish moss, creating patterns that looked like the bars of a cage, or perhaps the path to freedom. Tomorrow would bring breakfast, more layers of truth and deception, more chances to either build or break the delicate thread that was weaving their lives together. For now, both Nia and Theo returned to their separate spaces. She to her apartment above stories of other people's lives, he to his rented room that felt nothing like the luxury he'd been born to, each carrying the weight of secrets that grew heavier with every moment they spent together. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Nia stood in her kitchen, measuring coffee beans with the same careful attention she used to arrange rare first editions. Morning light streamed through her windows, illuminating a space that was both carefully curated and deeply personal. Vintage botanical prints lined the walls, their muted colors complementing the well-worn hardwood floors. A collection of mismatched teacups hung from hooks beneath the cabinets, each one carrying its own story. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, aware that inviting Theo into her sanctuary meant exposing more than just her living space. Every object here held a piece of her truth. The framed photograph, face down on the bookshelf, the stack of unopened letters from Georgetown Law tucked away in her desk drawer, the small calendar on her wall with certain dates circled in red. At 8:55, she heard his footsteps on the stairs leading to her apartment above the bookstore. She'd left the shop closed this morning, putting up a sign that read, "Opening at 11 a.m. today." Another small deviation from her carefully structured routine. The knock came at 8:58. When she opened the door, Theo stood there holding a paper bag from the local farmer's market and wearing an expression that suggested he'd been as anxious about this morning as she had. "I know you said you'd cook," he said, lifting the bag slightly, "but I couldn't come empty-handed. Fresh peaches. They reminded me of you. Sweet, but with a hint of something deeper beneath the surface." The comment caught her off guard, making her cheeks warm as she stepped aside to let him in. She watched his eyes take in her space, noting how his gaze lingered on certain details, the rare book collection visible through her office door, the expensive coffee maker that seemed at odds with her modest surroundings, the small piano in the corner draped with a silk scarf. "You play?" he asked, nodding toward the piano. "Used to," she replied, moving to the kitchen to hide the flash of pain that crossed her face. "Coffee's almost ready. Make yourself comfortable." But Theo followed her instead, leaning against the counter as she pulled ingredients from the fridge. "Let me help," he offered, rolling up his sleeves. The movement revealed an expensive watch-tan line he quickly covered, but not before Nia noticed. They fell into an unexpected rhythm, moving around each other in the small kitchen as if they'd done this 100 times before. Nia couldn't help but notice how naturally Theo handled the chef's knife as he diced vegetables for the omelettes, his technique betraying years of proper training rather than the casual cooking skills of someone who'd worked odd jobs. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Here and there," he answered too quickly. "Like you pick things up when you travel." He paused, then added more truthfully, "My mother believed everyone should know their way around a kitchen, regardless of circumstances." The way he hesitated over the last word made Nia look up, catching an expression of genuine sadness cross his face before he masked it. "Tell me about her," Nia said softly, whisking eggs with fresh herbs. "She died 2 years ago," Theo replied, his knife stilling on the cutting board. "A cancer. It was quick, too quick for any of us to really prepare." For a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing raw grief underneath. She would have loved this kitchen, these teacups, the way the light comes in through those windows. Nia set down her whisk and moved closer, placing her hand gently on his arm. The gesture was instinctive, comfort offered without thought of secrets or consequences. Theo's hand covered hers, warm and solid, and for a moment they stood there in shared understanding of loss. The coffee maker beeped, breaking the spell. They moved apart, both aware of how the simple act of cooking breakfast together had shifted something between them. As they sat down to eat at Nia's small table by the window, the conversation flowed more easily, though both still carefully navigated around their deeper truths. Theo praised her herb-filled omelette with the enthusiasm of someone used to fine dining, but trying to hide it. Nia pretended not to notice how he automatically adjusted his posture when sitting, betraying years of formal training. "The peaches are perfect," she said, biting into one. A drop of juice ran down her chin, and before she could reach for her napkin, Theo's thumb brushed it away. The touch lingered. Electric. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, "I wish I could just stay here in this moment. No past, no future. Just this kitchen, this light, these peaches. Why can't you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Theo's eyes met hers, and for a second she thought he might actually tell her everything. Instead, He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I found this book. It's old, probably valuable. I thought maybe you could help me authenticate it." The abrupt change of subject was jarring, but as Naya opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph of the book in question, her professional mask slipped back into place, until she actually saw what she was holding. "This is," she breathed, her hands shaking slightly. "This is a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. Where did you get this?" "Found it in a small shop in Charleston," he said, watching her reaction carefully. The owner didn't seem to know what he had. Naya's mind raced. A first edition like this would be worth tens of thousands of dollars. The fact that Theo had found it and was so casual about it set off alarm bells she couldn't ignore. "I can help you verify it," she said slowly, "but you should know, if this is authentic, it's extremely valuable." "I know," he said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both recognized they were dancing around bigger truths than just the provenance of a rare book. The clock on her wall chimed 10, reminding her that she needed to open the store soon. As they cleared the breakfast dishes, their movements were more careful, more measured, as if both were suddenly aware of how domestic, how intimate the morning had become. At the door, Theo turned back. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for breakfast, but for sharing your space with me. I know it's not easy to let someone in." Nia touched her locket unconsciously. "No," she agreed. "And it's not." He leaned in slowly, telegraphing his intentions, giving her time to pull away. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, questioning. Nia's hand found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. For a moment, all their secrets seemed to fade away, leaving only this connection, this truth. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Theo rested his forehead against hers for a moment before stepping back. "And I'll bring the book by later," he said, "after you close." Watching him descend the stairs, Nia's fingers traced her lips, still tingling from the kiss. Then her eyes fell on the photograph of the rare book, and reality crashed back in. A man who could casually find a first edition To Kill a Mockingbird was either incredibly lucky, wealthy enough to buy it without thought, or lying about how he acquired it. She looked at the calendar on her wall, at the date circled in red just 2 weeks away. Everything was becoming complicated, and she was running out of time to keep her own secrets hidden. Below, she heard the bookstore's bell chime as Theo left. Through her window, she watched him walk away, noting how he unconsciously straightened his posture once he thought he was unobserved, carrying himself with the natural authority of someone born to wealth and privilege. "Who are you really? Theo Callahan," she whispered to the empty room. "And what will happen when I find out?" The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Cornerstone Books as Nia researched first editions of To Kill a Mockingbird on her laptop. Each detail she uncovered about the book's value and rarity made her more certain that Theo's story about finding it couldn't be true. A quick search showed that the last public sale of a first edition had been at Christie's for $48,000. Her research was interrupted by the electronic chime of her phone, not a text this time, but an email notification that made her stomach clench. The sender's name glowed accusingly on her screen. "Richard Maxwell, Georgetown Law School. Dear Miss Brooks, I trust this email finds you well. As discussed in our previous correspondence, the deadline for your deferred enrollment decision is approaching. Given the unique circumstances surrounding your initial deferral, the board has been exceptionally accommodating. However," Naya closed the email without reading further, her hand automatically reaching for her locket. Inside lay the reason she couldn't simply pack up and leave for law school, the promise that kept her tethered to Savannah like an anchor she wouldn't lift. The shop's bell chimed, and she quickly closed her laptop. But instead of Theo, she found herself facing a well-dressed woman in her 50s, her perfectly styled hair and designer handbag marking her as someone who rarely ventured into this part of town. "Can I help you?" Nia asked, noting how the woman's sharp eyes took in every detail of the store. I certainly hope so, the woman replied, her voice carrying the polished accent of old money. I'm looking for information about a book, a rather valuable one that may have passed through here recently. Something in her tone made Nia's guard rise. We deal with many books. Any particular title you're interested in? To Kill a Mockingbird, first edition. The woman's eyes fixed on Nia's face, watching for a reaction. It was reported missing from a private collection in Charleston last week. Perhaps you've heard something about it? Nia's heart stuttered, but years of keeping her own secrets had taught her how to maintain a calm exterior. That's quite specific. May I ask who you represent? Forgive me, the woman said, though her tone suggested forgiveness was not her strong suit. I'm Victoria Callahan. The book belongs to my family's collection. The name hit Nia like a physical blow. Callahan. Not just any Callahan. This had to be Theo's mother, the mother he'd claimed was dead. I'm sorry, Nia managed, her mind racing. I haven't seen or heard anything about such a valuable book, but I'll certainly keep an eye out. Victoria Callahan's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting, because our sources indicated that someone matching my son Theodore's description was seen entering this shop multiple times this week. Theo has always had a romantic notion about living among common people, playing poor, if you will, a phase we've indulged perhaps too long. Each word landed like a carefully aimed dart, designed to wound. Nia felt her carefully constructed world beginning to tilt on its axis. If you do see him, Victoria continued, placing a business card on the counter, please let him know that the board meeting is in 3 days, and his presence is non-negotiable. The future of Callahan Hotels doesn't wait for prodigal sons to finish their social experiments. After she left, Nia stood motionless behind the counter, Victoria's card burning like a brand before her. Everything about Theo had been a lie, his mother, his circumstances, his very identity. Yet even as anger and betrayal rose in her throat, a small voice whispered, "Aren't you lying too?" The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers and mundane transactions. As closing time approached, Nia found herself jumping at every sound, both dreading and longing for Theo's promised visit with the book. He arrived just after she'd turned the sign to "Closed," the valuable volume carefully wrapped in cloth. "Nia, he began, but stopped when he saw her expression. "Your mother was here today," she said quietly, watching the color drain from his face. "She's looking for that book, the one that was stolen from your family's collection in Charleston." Theo set the book on the counter with shaking hands. "I can explain." "Can you?" "Because she seemed quite alive for someone who died of cancer 2 years ago." "Nia, please." "No." She held up her hand. "You don't get to Nia, please me. You lied about everything. Your mother, your life, who you are. You're not some wandering soul looking for authenticity. You're Theodore Callahan, heir to a hotel empire, playing at being poor like it's some kind of game." "It's not a game," he said, his voice rough. "Everything I felt, everything I feel for you, that's real." "Is it? How would I know? How many other bookstore owners have you tested with your little social experiment?" The hurt that flashed across his face looked genuine, but Nia couldn't trust her judgment anymore. She reached for the wrapped book, but Theo caught her hand. "Yes, I lied about my circumstances," he said, "but I never lied about who I am. The man you've been spending time with, that's the real me. The hotels, the wealth, the expectations, that's the lie I've been living my whole life. And the book, did you steal it to make your little poverty play more convincing?" "I borrowed it," he said, "from my own family's collection. I needed a reason to spend more time with you, to see if you'd treat the book differently once you knew its value. To see if you'd treat me differently. Well, now you know," Nia said bitterly. "I'm just another test subject in your social experiment, another way to rebel against your privileged life." "No." Theo stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "You're the first real thing I've found in years. The only person who saw me, really saw me, without knowing about the money or the name." "I saw a lie," Nia countered, but her voice wavered. because even as anger coursed through her, she couldn't deny the connection they'd built over shared meals and quiet conversations. The way he looked at her like she was a story he desperately wanted to understand. "Then why does it hurt so much?" he asked softly. "If it was all a lie, why does the truth feel like it's tearing you apart?" Before she could answer, her phone chimed with another email notification. Georgetown Law's logo flashed on the screen, and Theo's eyes caught it before she could turn the phone over. "Georgetown Law?" he asked. "I thought you said you never went to college." Now it was Nia's turn to pale. "I think you should leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Take the book. Go back to your real life. The board meeting's in 3 days. Remember, wouldn't want to keep the family empire waiting." "Nia, please," she said, and something in her tone made him step back. "Just go." After he left, Nia sank to the floor behind her counter, her back against the shelves of stories that had been her refuge. Her hand clutched her locket, and for the first time in years, she opened it, looking at the small photograph inside. The reason she'd given up law school, the promise that kept her bound to Savannah. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the image. "I'm so sorry." Outside, thunder rolled across Savannah's sky, promising a storm. Nia remained on the floor, surrounded by other people's stories, while her own threatened to unravel around her. Rain pounded against the windows of Cornerstone Books, turning Savannah's streets into mirrors that reflected the stormy sky. 3 days had passed since Theo's deception had been exposed. 3 days of Nia mechanically going through the motions of running her store, while trying to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. She'd removed the "opening at 11 a.m. sign that morning, erasing the last visible trace of their breakfast together. But everywhere she looked, memories lingered. The corner where he'd first asked about second chances, the window seat where they'd discussed favorite books, the tea house next door where his storm-cloud eyes had seen too much. The shop's bell chimed, and Nia looked up from her inventory list, half expecting, half hoping to see Theo. Instead, she found herself facing Ruby Pearl, carrying a covered dish that filled the store with the scent of freshly baked comfort. "Child," Ruby said, setting the dish on the counter, "you look like you haven't slept in days." "I'm fine," Nia replied automatically, but her voice cracked on the second word. Ruby's knowing eyes took in the untouched tea beside Nia's laptop, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her fingers kept straying to her locket. "And I'm the Queen of England. Now you're going to sit down and tell me what's really going on." "Ruby, I can't." "Can't what?" "I can't tell me why that boy with the old money manners and new money lies hasn't been around. Can't explain why you're watching that door like you're expecting a ghost. Or can't talk about what's in that locket you keep clutching like it's your lifeline." Nia's hand dropped from the locket as if it had burned her. "You knew about Theo. Honey, I've been feeding this city's stories for 40 years. You think I can't spot a Callahan trying to hide in plain sight?" Ruby pulled up a chair, her expression softening. "But that's not what's really eating at you, is it?" The kindness in Ruby's voice was Nia's undoing. "I thought I could keep everything separate," she whispered. "The store, the past, the promises I made." And then he walked in with his own secrets, and suddenly everything started tangling together. "Seems to me," Ruby said gently, "that some tangles are meant to be sorted out, not cut through." Before Nia could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number displayed made her blood run cold. Savannah Memorial Hospital. "Miss Brooks," a professional voice said when she answered. "This is regarding Daniel Brooks. There's been a change in his condition." The world tilted sideways. Ruby must have seen something in her face because she was suddenly there, supporting Nia's elbow, guiding her to a chair. "I'll be right there," Nia managed, ending the call. She looked at Ruby with desperate eyes. "I need to go," Ruby said firmly. "I'll watch the store." The rain had turned torrential by the time Nia reached the hospital. She barely noticed her soaked clothes as she made her way to the long-term care wing, a path she knew by heart. Outside room 415, she paused, gathering strength before pushing open the door. The steady beep of monitors filled the room, a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. In the bed lay a man in his early 60s, once robust but now diminished by 3 years of unconsciousness. Daniel Brooks, her father, her reason for staying, her most carefully guarded secret. "Ms. Brooks," Dr. Chen greeted her, his expression carefully neutral. "We've detected some changes in your father's brain activity. There's been a slight increase in—" The rest of his explanation faded into background noise as Naya approached the bed. She reached for her father's hand, remembering how these same fingers had once taught her to play piano, had shown her how to determine a book's age by its binding, had pressed the locket into her palm with urgent instructions just before the stroke that stole him from her. "The next 72 hours will be critical," Dr. Chen was saying. "If these changes continue—" Nia nodded mechanically, her mind racing. 72 hours. The same time frame as Georgetown's final deadline, the same day as the Callahan board meeting. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. Hours passed in the uncomfortable hospital chair, the rain outside creating a monotonous backdrop to her vigil. She dozed fitfully, dreaming of Theo's hands making breakfast in her kitchen, of her father playing the piano, of secrets spilling like ink across the pages of her life. A soft knock at the door startled her awake. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming, because there stood Theo, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit soaked through. "How did you—" she began. "Ruby," he said simply. "I went to the store to try to explain, to make things right. She told me where to find you." He hesitated in the doorway. "I can leave if you want me to." Nia looked at her father's still face, at the locket that held his photograph, at the man who had lied to her but was now standing here, dripping rainwater onto hospital tiles. "Why did you come?" "Because when Ruby told me about your father, suddenly everything made sense. The locket, the delayed law school, the way you guard your independence like it's armor." He took a step into the room. "And because I realized that while I was testing you, trying to find someone who could love me without my name, you were protecting something far more precious than pride." "I couldn't leave him," Naya said, the words she'd held back for 3 years finally spilling out. "The stroke happened 2 days before I was supposed to start at Georgetown. He'd just uncovered something about the development project that was going to destroy the historic district. He gave me the locket, told me to keep it safe, that the proof was—" She stopped, realizing she was still revealing secrets that weren't entirely hers to share. Theo moved closer, his voice soft. "The Callahan Riverview project, the one that mysteriously fell through 3 years ago." Nia's eyes snapped to his. "How did you—" "Because it was my first major project for the company. And because 2 days before the final contracts were signed, someone anonymously sent evidence of historic preservation law violations to the city council." He looked at Daniel's still form with new understanding. "Your father, he was the one who found the proof. The evening before his stroke, he told me he'd discovered something that could stop the project, but before he could explain—" Nia's voice cracked. "The doctors said the stress might have triggered it. He collapsed in his study, and I've been here ever since, waiting, watching, trying to protect whatever he thought was important enough to risk everything for." Theo sank into the chair beside her. "I've spent the last 3 years trying to change how we do business, fighting against the old guard's destructive development practices, but I never knew—" He reached for her hand. "Nia, I'm so sorry. For lying, for not trusting you with the truth, for being part of what happened to your father." "You weren't responsible," she said, surprising herself by twining her fingers with his. "You were trying to find your own truth, just like I was trying to protect my father's." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain and the steady beep of monitors. Then Theo spoke again, his voice careful. "The board meeting tomorrow. I'm supposed to present our new direction for the company. A focus on historical preservation, community integration, sustainable development." He squeezed her hand. "Come with me." Help me make sure no other families have to go through what yours did." Before Nia could respond, a new sound filled the room, a change in the rhythm of the monitors, a flutter of eyelids, a slight pressure of fingers against her palm. "Dad," she whispered, hardly daring to hope. Daniel Brooks's eyes opened slowly, focusing first on his daughter's face, then shifting to her joined hands with Theo, and finally to the locket still hanging around her neck. His lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Nia leaned closer, her heart pounding. "What is it, Dad?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough from 3 years of silence, but his words were clear. The proof in the locket was never about the buildings. Outside, the rain began to ease, and through the hospital window, the first rays of sunset painted the sky in shades of hope. But inside room 415, time seemed to stop as father and daughter looked at each other across a 3-year gulf of secrets, while Theo Callahan watched a new mystery unfold before him. Dawn was breaking over Savannah when Nia finally returned to her apartment above the bookstore, Theo's steady presence beside her. The past 12 hours had been a blur of doctors, tests, and her father's intermittent consciousness. Now, with Daniel stable but resting, she could finally focus on his cryptic words about the locket. "You've never opened it?" Theo asked, watching as Nia's fingers traced the silver edges of the pendant that had become both talisman and burden. "Once," she admitted, sinking onto her worn leather couch, "the day after his stroke. But all I found was an old photograph and what looked like a key." She glanced up at him. "I thought the key might lead to documents about the development project, but I searched his study for months and never found anything it would open." Theo sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but leaving space for her to breathe. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand. With trembling fingers, Nia unclasped the locket and placed it in his palm. It felt strange to surrender something she'd carried for 3 years, like removing a piece of her own skin. Theo handled it with reverence, turning it over under the soft morning light. "This isn't just any locket," he said after a moment, his voice carrying a note of recognition. "This is Victorian era, probably 1870s. See these markings here." He pointed to tiny engravings along the edge. "They're not just decorative, they're a code." Nia leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "A code. My grandmother collected antique jewelry. She had a piece similar to this, a locket that was actually a message system used during the Civil War." His fingers found a nearly invisible seam. The visible compartment would hold an innocent photograph, but there was usually a soft click interrupted him as a hidden chamber within the locket sprang open. They both stared at what lay inside. Not documents about building codes or zoning violations, but a small USB drive, barely larger than a thumbnail. "Dad said it wasn't about the buildings," Nia whispered, pieces starting to fall into place. Whatever he found went deeper than that. Theo was already reaching for her laptop, his movements urgent. 3 years ago, when the evidence about historic preservation violations came out, my father was strange. Not just angry about the project failing, but scared. He started drinking heavily, making phone calls in the middle of the night. The USB drive hummed to life as Nia plugged it in, revealing a single encrypted file. "It needs a password," she said, frustration edging into her voice. "Try Cornerstone," Theo suggested. When she looked at him questioningly, he added, "The original Callahan Hotel in Savannah. My great-grandfather bought it in 1923. It was the foundation of everything we built." Nia typed it in, but the file remained locked. "No. Wait." She sat up straighter. "Not your Cornerstone. Mine." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing Pride and Prejudice, the first rare book her father had ever given her, the one that had inspired the name of their store. The file opened, revealing a folder of documents that made both of them catch their breath. Financial records, offshore accounts, emails discussing bribes and money laundering, all pointing to a massive scheme that went far beyond one development project. "These transfers," Theo said, his voice tight as he scanned the documents, "they're all authorized by my father. He wasn't just breaking preservation laws, he was using the company to move money for some very dangerous people. That's why Dad had the stroke, Nia realized, her hand finding Theo's. He didn't just discover evidence about the buildings, he uncovered a criminal enterprise. They must have found out he knew. A stroke that conveniently silenced him without raising suspicion. Theo's grip on her hand tightened. And now he's awake, right before the board meeting where I'm supposed to announce taking over as CEO. The implications hung heavy in the morning air. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the empty teacups from their breakfast together days ago, making the whole scene feel surreal. "What are you going to do?" Nia asked softly. Theo stood, moving to the window that overlooked the street where they'd first met. "What my mother would have wanted me to do." He turned back to Nia, his face set with determination. "The real Victoria Callahan, not the woman you met. My mother died 2 years ago, but not from cancer. She died in a car accident after she started asking questions about the company's finances." Nia rose to join him at the window, her heart aching for the pain she heard in his voice. "The woman who came to the store. My father's second wife. She took my mother's name, her place on the board, her whole identity. I played along because I was trying to figure out what really happened." His hand cupped Nia's cheek. And then I met you. And suddenly pretending to be someone else wasn't about investigation anymore. It was about finding something real in a life built on lies." The distance between them disappeared as Nia leaned into his touch. "We have 12 hours until the board meeting," she said. "What's our next move? First, we make copies of everything on that drive. Then we call my contact at the FBI, someone I've been working with since my mother's death." He paused, studying her face. "This could get dangerous, Nia. These people, they've already hurt your father once. They tried to silence him," she corrected, steel entering her voice. "But they failed, and now we have the proof he risked everything to protect." She reached up, covering his hand with hers. "I'm not hiding anymore, Theo. Not from the truth, and not from how I feel about you." The kiss they shared then was different from their first. Not gentle exploration, but fierce commitment, sealed with the weight of shared purpose and newfound trust. When they parted, Theo pressed his forehead to hers. "We should get to the hospital. Your father might remember more now that he's awake. And, he smiled slightly. "I think it's time he properly met the man who fell in love with his daughter while pretending to be poor." "Love," Nia's breath caught. "Love," Theo confirmed. "The real kind. The kind that survives secrets and lies and comes out stronger on the other side." Outside, Savannah was waking up, unaware that within the walls of a modest bookstore, 2 people had just committed to changing the course of not just their lives, but an empire built on decades of deception. Nia looked at the locket lying open on her laptop, its hidden chamber finally revealed. Like the truth between her and Theo, it had been there all along, waiting for the right moment, the right touch, to spring open and spill its secrets into the light. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Daniel Brooks's hospital room as Nia and Theo sat beside his bed, watching him drift in and out of consciousness. Each time he woke, his mind seemed clearer, pieces of memory floating back like leaves on a tide. "The woman," Daniel said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been that morning, "in the white suit, she was there that night." Nia leaned forward, her hand tightening around her father's. "What woman, Dad?" "In my study, before." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the hospital room that had been his home for 3 years. "She wanted something. Said it wasn't just about the money anymore." Theo's posture stiffened. "Was she wearing a pearl necklace?" 3 strands. Daniel's eyes focused on Theo, really seeing him for the first time. "Yes, called herself Victoria, but that wasn't her real name," Theo finished, his voice tight. "That was my stepmother, the one who's been running the company with my father." He turned to Nia, his expression grim. "She didn't just know about the criminal enterprise. She was part of it before she ever married my father." A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. I'm sorry, but Mr. Brooks needs his rest. Doctor's orders." As they stepped into the hallway, Nia's phone buzzed with a text from Ruby. "Someone's been asking questions at the store. Well-dressed man. Wrong kind of interested in your apartment." "They know," Theo said, reading over her shoulder. "They must have realized your father was awake and connected the dots." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "The board meeting's in 6 hours. We need to move faster." "I need to get back to the store," Nia said. "If they've been there—" "No," Theo's hand caught her arm. "That's exactly what they'd expect. We need to be smarter than that." He pulled out his phone, fingers flying over the keys. "My FBI contact is standing by, but we need to deliver everything at once. The USB drive, my father's files, your father's testimony. No loose ends they can unravel." "And how exactly do we do that?" A slight smile crossed Theo's face. "By giving them exactly what they want, the prodigal son returning to take his place in the family business." Understanding dawned in Nia's eyes. "Oh, the board meeting. More than that, the annual Callahan Gala is tonight, right before the meeting. Every major player will be there, celebrating what they think is their final victory. My father stepping down, me taking over as their perfect puppet CEO." "It's too dangerous," Nia protested. "They've already hurt my father once. If they realize we know—" "They won't," Theo assured her, leading her toward the hospital parking garage. "Because you're going to be my date to the gala." "What?" "Think about it. They'll be watching your apartment, the store, the hospital, but they'd never expect you to walk right through the front door of the Callahan Hotel." His eyes held a mixture of determination and fear, not for himself, but for her. "Unless you think it's too much to ask." Nia thought of her father lying in that hospital bed for 3 years, of Theo losing his mother to these people's schemes, of the weight she'd carried in that locket for so long. "Ask me properly," she said. Theo blinked. "What?" "Ask me to be your date. The real you, asking the real me." Understanding softened his features. He took her hands in his, thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Nia Brooks, will you do me the honor of accompanying me to this ridiculous display of wealth and power, so we can bring down a criminal enterprise and maybe save my family's soul in the process?" She couldn't help but laugh, even as tears threatened. "Well, when you put it that way." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. Theo's first stop was a boutique he'd called ahead to, where a gown in deep emerald silk waited for Nia. "I had them rush it," he admitted as she emerged from the fitting room. "I remembered how you looked in that green sweater the morning we had breakfast." The dress fit perfectly, making Nia wonder if he'd somehow known all along they'd end up here. She watched in the mirror as he fastened her locket around her neck, no longer a burden of secrets, but a weapon of truth they'd wield together. Next was a quick stop at his real apartment, a penthouse that should have felt intimidating, but somehow just felt like another facet of the man she'd grown to love. He emerged from his room in a tuxedo that transformed him back into Theodore Callahan, heir apparent, but his eyes when they met hers were still the same ones that had searched for second chances in her bookstore. "The FBI team will be in position by 8, he said, as they rode the elevator down to his private garage. "All we have to do is get through dinner, make sure all the players are in place, and then we blow up your entire world," Nia finished softly. Theo's hand found hers. "My world blew up the day my mother died. What we're doing tonight is building something new from the ashes." He hesitated. "After it's over. After the dust settles. I meant what I said about love." "I know." Nia squeezed his hand. "So did I." The sun was setting as they pulled up to the Callahan Hotel, its historic facade glowing golden in the last light of day. Valets rushed to open their doors, and Nia felt Theo's hand at the small of her back, steadying her as they walked into the lion's den. In the gleaming lobby, faces turned to watch them pass. The Golden Prince returned to claim his crown, with an unknown woman on his arm. Nia felt Victoria's sharp gaze find them before they even reached the ballroom. saw the calculation in her eyes as she registered who exactly her stepson had brought to this celebration of power and privilege. "Theo, darling," Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of conversations. "How unexpected to see you here, and with—" Her eyes raked over Nia, seeing the bookstore owner who had claimed ignorance about a stolen first edition just days ago. "You remember Miss Brooks?" Theo said smoothly, his public school polish firmly in place. "She's been enlightening me about the value of preservation, of protecting things that matter." Victoria's perfect smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "How fascinating. I'm sure your father will be very interested in hearing all about it at the board meeting." As she swept away, Nia felt Theo's hand tighten on her waist. Through the crowd, she could see Richard Callahan holding court near the bar, his florid face suggesting he'd already started celebrating. He raised his glass in their direction, a gesture that managed to be both welcoming and vaguely threatening. "Last chance to walk away," Theo whispered, his lips close to her ear under the pretense of an intimate moment. Nia turned to face him, reaching up to straighten his bow tie. To anyone watching, they were the picture of a young couple in love, which, she realized, wasn't a lie at all. "We stopped walking away the moment you stepped into my bookstore, looking for second chances." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then shall we?" Hand in hand, they moved into the glittering crowd, each step taking them closer to the moment when all these carefully constructed facades would shatter. In her mind, Nia could hear the steady beep of her father's hospital monitors, counting down like a metronome to the truth. Above them, crystal chandeliers cast light and shadow across the ballroom's gilded ceiling, creating patterns that looked almost like the bars of a cage, or perhaps, Nia thought, like the bars of a jail cell soon to be filled. The Callahan Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like a fever dream, crystal and gold, reflecting the carefully curated illusion of old money and respectability. Nia watched the room from her position at the dinner table, cataloguing details with the same precision she used for rare books. The slight tremor in Richard Callahan's hand as he lifted his wineglass, the way Victoria's eyes constantly scanned the crowd, the subtle earpieces worn by security personnel stationed at every exit. Theo sat beside her, playing his part to perfection. The prodigal son returned, appropriately contrite about his social experiment, and ready to take his place in the family dynasty. But beneath the table, his fingers were intertwined with hers, their shared grip white-knuckled with tension. 10 minutes until the board meeting," he murmured, his lips barely moving. FBI team confirmed they're in position. Nia nodded slightly, her free hand touching the locket that now felt like it was burning against her skin. The USB drive inside carried enough evidence to destroy not just the Callahan empire, but the entire criminal network it had been laundering money for. Victoria rose from her seat at the head table, tapping her glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have a moment of your time," her voice carried across the room, smooth as honey laced with poison. "As you know, we're gathered not just for our annual gala, but to celebrate a transition. Richard has led Callahan Hotels for 30 years, building on his father's legacy to create something truly remarkable. And tonight, that legacy passes to the next generation." Applause rippled through the room. Nia felt Theo's hand tighten around hers. "Theodore," Victoria continued, turning her predatory smile their way, "why don't you say a few words before the board meeting? Share with everyone your enlightening experiences these past few weeks." It was a trap, carefully baited. If Theo refused, he'd look ungrateful, unprepared for leadership. If he accepted, of course, Theo said smoothly, rising to his feet. He squeezed Nia's hand once before letting go, a gesture that could have meant anything from "wish me luck" to "run if this goes wrong." He moved to the small stage with the natural grace of someone born to command rooms like this. But Nia saw something in his stance that the others missed, the same quiet strength she'd first noticed in a worn hoodie, browsing through her bookstore. "Under my father, Theo began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room, always taught me that the Callahan name was built on understanding value, the value of property, of opportunity, of legacy. He paused, his eyes finding Nia's. But recently, I've learned about different kinds of value, the worth of truth, the price of silence, the cost of pretending to be something you're not. A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile froze. Richard Callahan set down his drink. 3 years ago, Theo continued, my mother, my real mother, the first Victoria Callahan, died in what we were told was a car accident. But she left me a message, one I didn't understand until now. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a folded paper. The night before she died, she wrote, "The cornerstone holds more than foundations." Nia's breath caught. The original Callahan Hotel, Cornerstone. Just like her bookstore. I spent 2 years looking for her truth in all the wrong places, Theo said, until I walked into a bookstore called Cornerstone Books and met someone else who understood the weight of carrying secrets. Victoria's voice cut through the tension. Theodore, darling, perhaps this isn't the most appropriate. I think it's exactly appropriate, Theo interrupted, his tone hardening, because tonight isn't just about a transition of power. It's about bringing something into the light. He nodded toward the ballroom doors, which opened to reveal a team of FBI agents led by a sharp-faced woman in a dark suit. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Richard Callahan lurching to his feet, Victoria's hand diving into her clutch, security personnel reaching for weapons, but they had all underestimated one crucial detail. Nia Brooks was her father's daughter, trained to notice what others missed. She saw Victoria's fingers close around something that wasn't a phone, saw the way her clutch was weighted on one side. Without thinking, she surged forward, catching the older woman's wrist just as she drew out a small pistol. The weapon clattered to the floor as FBI agents swarmed the room. Chaos erupted, guests screaming, tables overturning, champagne flutes shattering on marble floors. Through it all, Theo's voice continued, steady and clear. "The evidence is already being uploaded to every major news outlet," he announced. 3 years of financial records, emails, offshore accounts, everything my mother found, everything Daniel Brooks discovered, everything that nearly cost him his life. Richard Callahan's face had turned from florid to ashen. "Son," he pleaded, "whatever you think you know, I know you killed my mother." Theo cut him off, his composure finally cracking. "And I know you and Victoria had Daniel Brooks silenced when he discovered your money laundering operation. I know you've spent 30 years building this company on blood money and broken lives." Victoria, her wrists now in handcuffs, laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You stupid boy. You think this ends with us, the people we work for. They won't just disappear because of some leaked documents." "No," Nia spoke up, still holding the locket that had started everything. "But they'll have to find new partners, and thanks to my father's evidence, we know exactly who they are." The FBI agent in charge stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, the board meeting will have to be postponed. We have some other matters to discuss." As Richard and Victoria were led away, the ballroom slowly emptied of shocked guests and flustered security personnel. Nia found herself standing in the aftermath of destruction, overturned tables, scattered flowers, shattered crystal catching light like frozen tears. Theo crossed the room to her, his face bearing the weight of everything they'd just done. "Are you all right? Are you?" she countered softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I don't know," he admitted. "Or I just destroyed my family's company, had my father and stepmother arrested, and exposed a decades-long criminal enterprise. I should probably be feeling something more than just relieved. What happens now?" "Now." Theo's arms slid around her waist, pulling her close. "Now we go tell your father he can finally rest easy. The truth is out. No more shadows, no more secrets, no more pretending," Nia added, thinking of all the masks they'd both worn. "No more pretending," he agreed. And when he kissed her, it tasted like freedom. But as they left the ballroom, Nia couldn't shake Victoria's words about the people they worked for. Something in the woman's tone suggested this victory, while significant, might not be the end of their story. Outside, Savannah's night air was thick with jasmine and possibility. Spanish moss swayed in the breeze, casting shifting shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets still untold, of dangers not yet faced. But for now, Nia thought, perhaps it was enough to have won this battle, to have chosen truth over safety, love over fear. The locket against her chest felt lighter somehow, transformed from a burden into a badge of courage. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The bookstore owner who had guarded her father's truth and the hotel heir who had chosen love over legacy, both finally free to write their own story. 3 weeks after the Callahan Gala, autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Cornerstone Books, illuminating dust motes that danced like memories in the air. Nia stood at her usual place behind the counter, but everything else had changed. The store was closed for the day, its shelves serving as backdrop for a different kind of story. FBI agents moved efficiently through the space, installing discreet security systems, a necessary precaution given Victoria's ominous warnings about her criminal connections. But they weren't what held Nia's attention. Her eyes were fixed on the scene by the window seat. Her father, Daniel Brooks, sitting upright in a wheelchair, his hands steady as he held a first edition of Pride and Prejudice. "Your mother loved this spot," he said, his voice growing stronger each day. "She always said bookstores were proof that magic existed, all these worlds contained within walls, just waiting to be discovered." Theo, who had been conferring with the security team, moved to join them. He'd abandoned his previous pretense of poverty, but neither had he returned to the polished corporate image of Theodore Callahan, heir apparent. Instead, he'd found a middle ground, well-tailored clothes that didn't hide who he was, but didn't define him either. "Speaking of walls," he said, settling beside Nia, "the restoration team found something interesting in the original Cornerstone Hotel. A hidden room behind the basement wall, filled with ledgers dating back to the 1920s. Turns out my great-grandfather wasn't just hiding from prohibition. He was keeping records of every dirty deal the family made." "More evidence?" Nia asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. "Enough to help the FBI trace the entire network." Victoria wasn't lying about how deep this went. His hand found hers, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. But she was wrong about them being untouchable. Daniel nodded toward the window, where a news van was pulling up outside. "They're here for the announcement." "Right on time," Theo confirmed. He glanced at Nia. "Are you sure about this?" She squeezed his hand in response. They'd spent weeks planning this moment, crafting a future from the ashes of exposed lies. Now it was time to share it with the world. The bell above the door chimed as Ruby Pearl entered, carrying what smelled suspiciously like her famous peach cobbler. Behind her came a stream of familiar faces, regular customers, local business owners, even some former Callahan Hotel employees who had chosen truth over loyalty to the old regime. As the small crowd settled among the bookshelves, Theo stepped forward. Gone was any trace of the uncertain man who had first walked into Cornerstone Books looking for second chances. In his place stood someone who had found his own truth. "Thank you all for coming," he began. 3 weeks ago, the Callahan Hotel empire was exposed as a front for criminal activities that hurt this community and many others. My father and stepmother are facing federal charges, and the company's assets have been frozen pending investigation. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone in Savannah had followed the scandalous fallout, but few knew what would come next. "But Savannah's history isn't just about the Callahans," Theo continued. "It's about every small business, every historic building, every person who adds their chapter to this city's story. Which is why today I'm announcing the creation of the Cornerstone Foundation." Nia stepped forward to join him, their shoulders brushing. "The foundation will be funded by legitimate Callahan assets and managed by a board of community leaders," she explained. Its mission is to preserve and support Savannah's historic districts while ensuring ethical development that serves the whole community. And its first project, Theo added, smiling at Daniel, will be establishing a legal fund for small business owners and residents fighting against predatory development. Because sometimes the most valuable things we can preserve are the spaces where everyday magic happens. As if on cue, Ruby started passing out cobbler while reporters scribbled notes and cameras flashed. Nia watched her father accept congratulations on his appointment as the Foundation's first board member, his eyes clear and focused in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Miss Brooks," a young reporter approached, notebook in hand. "There are rumors that you and Mr. Callahan are more than just business partners. Any comment on your personal relationship?" Before Nia could respond, the store's bell chimed again. A distinguished-looking woman in her 60s entered, carrying a familiar leather briefcase. "Dean Maxwell," Nia breathed, recognizing the head of Georgetown Law School. "Ms. Brooks," the dean smiled warmly. "I received your email about deferring acceptance for another year to establish the foundation. I have a counter-proposal." She opened her briefcase. "How would you feel about completing your law degree here in Savannah? We're establishing a satellite campus focusing on preservation law and ethical development. We need adjunct professors with practical experience." Nia felt Theo's arm slip around her waist as she processed this new possibility, a way to pursue her dreams without leaving everything she'd built. "And I think," she said carefully, "that would make an excellent addition to the story." Later that evening, after the reporters had gone and the security team had finished their work, Nia and Theo sat in the window seat where their journey had begun. Her father had gone home with Ruby, who had appointed herself his personal chef during recovery. The store was quiet except for the gentle tick of the old clock and the whisper of pages settling into sleep. "I have something for you," Theo said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small box that made Nia's heart skip. Inside wasn't a ring, not yet, but a key. Ancient and ornate, it matched the one she'd carried in her locket for 3 years. "It opens a door in the original Cornerstone Hotel," Theo explained. "Behind it is a small library, untouched since the 1920s. I thought maybe it could be the start of our next chapter." Nia traced the key's intricate pattern, thinking of all the doors that had opened and closed since a man in a worn hoodie had walked into her store looking for second chances. "Victoria's associates are still out there," she said quietly. "They won't be happy about what we've done." "No," Theo agreed, his arm tightening around her. "But they'll find this city isn't as easy to intimidate as they think. Savannah protects its own." As if in response, a warm breeze stirred the Spanish moss outside, carrying the scent of jasmine and possibility. Nia thought of her mother reading in this very spot, of her father protecting truth at any cost, of Theo choosing love over legacy. She thought of all the stories these shelves had witnessed, and all the ones yet to be written. "Our own story's just beginning, isn't it?" she asked, letting her head rest against his shoulder. "It is," Theo confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And like all the best books, it's going to keep us guessing until the very last page." Outside, Savannah's evening settled over the historic streets like a well-worn blanket. Inside Cornerstone Books, 2 people who had started their journey in masks and secrets sat surrounded by stories, writing their own tale word by word, truth by truth, love by love. Nia's hand went to her locket one last time, not to check its secrets, but to feel its familiar weight. It was no longer a burden of things hidden, but a reminder of how truth, once revealed, could light the way forward. The key to their future lay beside it, promising not just one new door, but a lifetime of chapters waiting to be discovered together. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one a witness to endings and beginnings, to secrets exposed and loves revealed, to the endless possibility of blank pages waiting to be filled with whatever story they chose to write next. The end. Would you forgive someone who lied about their entire identity if they did it to find true love? Theo pretended to be poor to test Nia's heart, while she hid devastating family secrets to protect her father. In the end, their deceptions led them to a deeper truth. What would you do in their place? Would you risk everything for love, or is honesty always the best policy from the start? Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.